Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning Your Lines, where we're going to talk about maintaining your dental unit water lines and your suction lines for optimal safety. So hopefully everybody is, safe where they are and they have power and they have water. And, I wonder if you can find toilet paper. I'm on the East Coast in Virginia, and we apparently cannot get toilet paper right now. So who knew that toilet paper was such a thing? But we have a strike, a longshoreman strike where we live. So yeah. So hopefully you guys are safe. But today we're going to talk a little bit about water and suction. So I do have the chat and the Q&A up. So if you have questions, feel free to pop those in as we go. And I'm happy to kind of address those as we go along. But I got to tell you guys, I could talk about this for this could be a 3-hour lecture. So this one's going to be fast and furious. But as we look at the lines that are in our operatory, do you see this beautiful? I mean, look at this beautiful operatory. Do you see how straight and pretty the lines are? Oh my goodness, they're so nice. And they, they're not getting tangled. It's not like when you go to pick up your suction, your slow speed falls on the floor where you're picking up your HV or something like this. This is more like what a true operatory looks like, right? I mean, can you guys agree with this? My lines are all kind of discolored, and I go to pick up, let's say, like the slow evacuation suction, and the high vac falls on the floor. I go to pick up my air water syringe and something falls, and they get tangled up in our operatories, right? But these lines also get tangled up in our heads. And it's funny because I actually started speaking only about dental unit water lines, and I got so many questions around dental suction lines. And I was like, oh no, I don't know those, that I decided, well, maybe I should know those too. And so that's why I lecture about both. So by the end of today's class, you guys will be a line leader, just like my daughter here when she was 5. That was like my favorite job in the first grade, was to be line leader. Did you guys like that job? I loved being the one, and everybody had to follow me. And so anyway, by the end of this, you too will be a line leader with me. So our objectives for today, we're going to describe the importance of clean dental unit water lines, why we care about that. We're going to talk about the steps that we need to do to get there. And we're going to talk about formulating an effective protocol for both your water lines and your suction lines, and then products on the market that will help us do that. So let's start off by talking about water first, okay? Oh, and hey, Yaslin, thanks for coming on. Good to see your name. So first, we're going to talk about water, and then we'll switch to suction. That way we won't get them all confused. So why do we test water, aside from the fact that, it's fun? We test water because there is biofilm growing in those lines. We also test water because we know that water, that biofilm, can affect our patient's health. And it can affect our health. And the CDC, the ADA, the ADS, which is formerly known as OSAP, now they're the Association for Dental Safety, they say that we need to be doing this. And so this is something that we should be doing. But what is it about water lines? What is it about it? I didn't put the biofilm in there. You didn't put the biofilm there. And so what is it about water lines that makes biofilm grow? And if you see this picture, do you see this green tubing here? The inside of that tubing, that yellow that you see, isn't actually it's not yellow on the inside of those lines. No, that is biofilm growing in those lines. It's just like a nice, it's almost painted on, right? And you can see a picture of it there on a spectron microscope, what it looks like. But why that biofilm grows is you think about how skinny those lines are. Have you ever taken off your air water syringe because, I don't know, maybe something's going on with it, and those lines are so skinny, you could fit a paper clip in them, right? Because those lines are so skinny, and because that water flows really slowly, that microbial attachment is able to happen inside those lines. And when you think, well, it doesn't really flow slowly, but I want you to think about if you decided to take a cup of water and you wanted to fill a cup of water with just using your air water syringe, it would take you a long time to fill that cup up, right? So it really is, even though it doesn't feel like a low flow, it actually is a really low flow of water. And that's really what allows that biofilm to adhere. I often hear from people, oh, well, our office is new, so we don't have to worry about this water thing yet because, we got a couple years, right? And I got to tell you, there's a study by Barbeau that shows that bacteria in dental unit water lines can reach up to 200,000 colony-forming units in less than 5 days in a brand new office. You just opened it. It's brand spanking new. You open it on Monday, and by Friday, you can have up to 200,000 colony-forming units. The EPA tells us safe water is 500 colony-forming units. So that's a whole lot more than 500, isn't it? And if you see these pictures here, you can see some of these things about like what the biofilm can sometimes look like coming out of our patients or coming out of our water lines. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. Like sometimes I've been like, maybe I'm power scaling away. All of a sudden I see like a black dot and I was like, did I see that? Was that my imagination? And that's probably biofilm getting released. And so it's really important that we take care of that biofilm and we make sure that it doesn't get in our line so it's not hurting our patients. Now, I could go on and on and on about a whole slew of different bacteria that exist in dental unit water lines and fungus and viruses and probably stuff that I couldn't pronounce. But the three things that we are most concerned about when it comes to the safety of dental unit water lines are Pseudomonas aeruginosa, non-tuberculous mycobacterium, and then the Legionella species. These are all things that have actually been traced back to harming patients. And so those are the ones that we tend to kind of look at and go, oh my goodness, that's not a good thing. So patients, I said there have been patients harmed, and here's a list of a few patients that have been harmed. Back in 2012 in Rome, Italy, there was a woman that actually died from Legionnaires, which traced that she'd only gone to her dentist office and back, and so we know that indeed that did come from her dental office. Then there was a case in Jonesboro, Georgia, that affected at least 30 children, maybe 35, in 2015. And they had all gone in for pulpotomies, routine pulpotomies, and then been sickened by those contaminated water lines. And then in Anaheim, California, we had a big case that kind of hit the news cycle, that was between 71 and 202 kids. Is really they were all harmed by dental unit water lines. And then we have a case in 2017 where a man in Sweden died from a cup filler, Caracas, Venezuela. There was 3 patients with severe infections in 2020. And in Virginia, there was actually a case that didn't hit the news cycle. I only know about it because I know the lawyer that was part of the case, and I actually got to chat with them a little bit about that case. And what that shows me is that we're not going to hear about all these cases. I think sometimes people will be like, wait, but that's only 5, Amanda. That's 5 since like 2012. It's no big deal. I think these often get settled far more quickly than we ever would think that they would be. So Naj is asking about how important it is to flush hand pieces the first thing in the morning. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So hold on to that question. Now, in 2022 on Halloween, the CDC actually issued a health advisory alert, a HAN alert. This was a big deal because this was the very first time that the CDC did this for something completely just related to dentistry. And what had happened was there was another case that came out about dental unit water lines. A group of children were affected by contaminated lines. And what they found, eventually we didn't know initially where it was, but we learned that also happened in Georgia. And that was with non-tuberculous mycobacterium. And so these cases are definitely showing up, and we're hearing more and more about them. They're hitting the news cycles because, well, darn it all, don't we want to do all we can to make dentistry a little more scary for our patients, right? But the one thing that I want us to ask and think about is all of these cases, certainly the US cases, because I'm very familiar with those. The one thing that all of those US cases have in common, and it's not like that they weren't doing anything with their water lines. They're actually many of them were actually treating their lines. They were using maybe a tablet or maybe a centralized system or something, and they thought that they were doing what they should be doing to take care of their lines. But the one thing that all of those cases were not doing was none of those cases were testing, or none of those offices were testing their water. And had they simply tested their water, they would have been fully aware of where their colony forming units were at and known that they needed to take remediation. They needed to do something to get rid of that biofilm. And so the one thing that I want you to take away from this, if you take away nothing else, is that testing your water is key. It's key to answering all of the questions about water lines that you might have. In fact, Naj's question about how important it is to flush, that could be part of knowing, oh my gosh, we haven't been flushing and now we're failing lines. Maybe that's what's causing us to fail. And so testing will answer a lot of questions for you. And darn it all, it's fun to test your water. So I mentioned that dental unit water lines have affected our patients' health, right? I gave you those cases and we know that has happened. But contaminated dental unit water lines can also affect our health as clinicians. And so not only is it important to take care of that for our patient's sake, but for our sake and the sake of our entire team that are in that office. And I keep adding studies to this slide, and I'm so excited. Like I'm breaking all the speaker notes, but rules. But what I like is that 3 studies have been done that show the same thing. And what the first initial study thought was that they didn't think that dental unit water lines were really a major basis of aerosol bacteria in the dental environment. This kind of came out right around COVID. We were a little afraid, right? We thought like, oh my gosh, like I felt like when I went back into the operatory after COVID that I was almost like walking through dandelion wishes that you see here, right? Like there was aerosols everywhere. Well, what we have found through these different studies, that middle study by Meadhill was from the Ohio State University, and they captured the aerosols in every single operatory in this study. And then they figured out what was in those aerosols. And what they figured out was that 78% of those aerosols, what was made up of those aerosols, came directly from our dental unit water. And in that study, 0% came from patient saliva. And in fact, there was a COVID positive patient in the study, and no COVID showed up in those aerosols. And so truthfully, we are not aerosolizing our patient saliva. This is great news. This is probably why we didn't become those super spreaders, right? But if we're not aerosolizing the patient's saliva, we are aerosolizing our dental unit water. So what are you breathing, right? Is your water safe for you to be breathing all day long? There's a 1988 study that shows that dental professionals have the highest prevalence of Legionella antibodies. It's because we're breathing it from our dental unit water lines. And we know that exposure to contaminated dental procedural water can lead to the exacerbation of asthma or the onset of other respiratory conditions. And I read an article not too long ago that said that the number one reason why dental professionals miss work is because of an upper respiratory infection. And it wasn't cited, so I can't give you the study, but it's an interesting thought around, is that really coming from our dental unit water? They redid that Legionella study in 2021 because somebody tried to debunk it. And what they found was, no, it is accurate. We are at a high risk for Legionella from our dental unit water lines. But if you are taking care of your water lines and you are testing, there is no need to worry that you know that what you're breathing is safe. So what does the CDC have to say about dental unit water lines? So back in 2003, when they issued their guidance, which I hear they're updating, I've been on some listening sessions, so hopefully they're updating this right now. So if you're on CDC, please keep working. I'll help you. But the CDC says that the water that we use in our operatories must meet the EPA standard for safe drinking water, which is less than 500 colony-forming units of heterotrophic bacteria. So they go on to say to consult with your dental manufacturer for the appropriate methods to maintain that water. And then they just say to follow the recommendation. So they're kind of a little loosey-goosey, I think, about really setting some strong rules. And I don't know about you, I like rules. I like, okay, do this often, do this when, and this when, and this when. And so then we have to go to other experts to figure out what the best plan is. So how do we take care of our water, and what do we do? Well, we want to incorporate a system of shocking, testing, treating, and then getting to a maintenance. So shocking is using a strong disinfectant to clean away that biofilm. Testing is making sure that it worked. Treating is delivering a low-level antimicrobial on a regular basis to kind of keep that biofilm down. And then maintaining means that we have a system. We have an SOP, a standard operating procedure that we know to stick with. So the first thing that you need to figure out is, where is your water coming from? So if you think about your office, you think about your operatory, does your water just come straight in from the city and into your chair and magically just come out your air water syringe? Or perhaps are you filling a bottle up every day? Or does it go through some kind of centralized system? And so that's going to make a difference in how you take care of your water. So if you are going through a centralized system, then that means actually there's not much you can do. You will have to call in a service tech if you have an issue. If you test your water and you find that you're failing, you'll have to bring in a service tech so that they can shock the lines. One thing I do want to caution you, though, is there are many centralized systems that people put in their offices that turn out to actually not be treating water at all. What they're doing is they are actually taking out the total dissolved solids. They're helping you make distilled water for your sterilizer, but they're not actually doing anything to treat the water. They don't have any antimicrobial in it that's helping keep the bacteria down. So if you think you have a centralized system and you're like, wait, I wonder if it has a treatment product, go ahead and double check, look up the instructions for use, or look up the information to make sure that it's doing that. And if you're using a centralized system and you get into a fail cycle, you're going to have to call a tech to help you. Many of us, though, have retrofitted our chairs to bottles. The practice where that I joined in 2019, they had just retrofitted all of the chairs with bottles. And actually for them, it cost about $100 a chair. So that was in 2018. I think now it's about $300 a chair because, that's how inflation seems to be working. But it's about $300 a chair to go ahead and have your chair retrofitted for a bottle. I really prefer bottles because it's a better way to be able to control how you're treating your water. One reason I really love bottles, actually, interestingly enough, my youngest daughter goes to Virginia Tech for college. And they're in the middle of a huge boil water emergency. And so they have to boil all their water before they can drink it. Well, there is no spring water to be found anywhere in the Roanoke Valley. You can't find any. You can't go buy water. And so if you have a dental office there, if you're using a centralized system, you aren't working. Your office is shut down. If you have a bottle system, you could actually boil water, then put it into your water bottle and actually continue working. So that's a big advantage to having that bottle system. So if you have a bottle system, what are you putting into your bottle? So you have some choices here. You can use spring water that you buy at, Sam's Club or Costco. You can use your in-office distiller. Maybe that makes the water that you want to use. You can use distilled water. You can use tap water. We use tap water in my practice. You could even put sterile water in your bottle. But what I want to caution you about is when you put sterile water in your bottle, it's a great water source. It's clean, but it's not sterile coming out the other end because the biofilm happens in the lines. That's where the growth happens. So make sure that you don't think that that's delivering sterile water. We'll talk about more of that at the end. And then I have this electric tea kettle here because, similar to the boil water emergency that I just said, you can use that to make safe water. Shannon Mills, who wrote the white paper on dental unit water lines, this is his favorite type of water to use in your water bottle. He likes the idea of coming in and boiling the water, maybe the night before you boil the water, and then that morning that water has cooled, and then that's the water that you use. So you have some choices about what you put in. Make sure you check your chair manufacturer's recommendations, though. There are some chairs out there that are now saying that not to use distilled water in the chair because it can corrode the brass fittings and it has a really low pH. So make sure you're using the proper water for your chair. So let's talk about shocking. What is shocking? So shocking is using that high-level antimicrobial that we talked about, that strong disinfectant to really blast away the biofilm. So you want to shock your lines before the initial use of any water treatment product. So if you are on this lecture right now and you're like, I don't think we're doing anything with our water, you probably should shock first. Go ahead and shock first. Then once you have a system going, you probably want to work on shocking probably quarterly. At my office, we used to shock, we were shocking twice a year, and then we started to fail some tests. So we went back to quarterly shocking. So figure out what works best for your office. But I want to encourage you not to wait until you get to 500. Don't wait until you fail a test to shock. In fact, if you see this little paddle here, you can see it has 2 dots on it. So I don't know, maybe that's 100 colony forming units, who knows? But the idea is if I saw any growth on a test, I'm saying, you know what, it's time to shock. And the reason I say that is because it means the biofilm has started. That biofilm creep, I call it the creep. It's great information to let you know, ooh, that biofilm's starting. And frankly, by the time you read this test a couple days after you take it, there's certainly more biofilm. It's sort of like always wanting to take care of one surface filling. You want to take care of an occlusal filling. You don't wait till it gets to an MOD. You don't take a gingivitis patient and wait till they get to periodontitis before you do some treatment. So really taking care of it before you fail is a really good move. So what are some good shocks that are out there? There's lots of great products on the market. Liquid Ultra, Monarch Line Cleaner, ICX Renew, good old bleach. I'm kind of a bleach fan. Citrasil. These are all great shock products that you can use. One thing I want to just tell you, no matter what shock product you choose, read the instructions for use. They all have slightly different instructions, and you want to make sure that you're not harming any of your equipment. So some great rules of thumb for how you shock. I really like to first air flush the line, meaning I turn off the unit and I push all the buttons. You go shh. And that way you've gotten kind of that residual water out. Then choose whatever solution you're going to use and read the instructions, right? If you have to mix it, you might some you have to take 2 bottles and mix them together and then add that to your dental unit water bottle and then reattach that bottle and then run it into each line. If you're using bleach, Like initially you'll smell the bleach, but then after a while you're going to go numb to the bleach smell, and bleach actually will get slippery. Some of these products like Liquid Ultra and ICX Renew and Citrasil, they have a color to them. I love that you can see a color on the other end that, really lets me know I got the bleach through. But make sure that you get into every single line, whether it's a line you use or not, because all of them harbor bacteria. And I got to tell you, your ultrasonic scaler takes forever. That is just a long tube and a slow flow. So make sure you get the shock into all of them. Then leave it in for the recommended time. So that could be 10 minutes for bleach. That could be overnight for Liquid Ultra. So more isn't better. If I said 10 minutes for bleach, don't think that 2 hours is better, because that could harm your equipment. So don't leave it in for longer than the recommended time. If it's an overnight shock, I would recommend putting a shock in progress sign, because Murphy's Law says you're sick the next day, and then somebody squirts shock into a patient's mouth or something like that. Then you can disconnect your bottle and dump it into the sink, or just run the rest of it through. I kind of like running the rest of it through. And then refill the bottles with warm water and flush and flush and flush and flush and flush until you've gotten all of that shock out. You don't want a patient to be like, the water tastes kind of funny, right? Make sure that you get all of that shock product out. If you are using bleach, make sure that you don't put any bleach into the suction lines. As a rule, I say that I use a bucket when I shock my lines. I just I put all the shock into a bucket. I don't want it to go down the suction lines because that can mess up your amalgam separator. So make sure you don't put any bleach in your suction lines. Okay, so now we have shocked. Now it's time to test. And testing is great. The one great thing about testing is the only way to know and prove that you are in fact taking care of your water. Oh, Rochelle just asked, are you familiar with OSOPure? It's a filtration system. Yes, installed at the main water valve. I am, Rochelle. And I've seen some really great results with OSOPure. So if that's what you're using and you guys are passing water line tests, that's awesome. And I'm excited for that. If you do start to have a fail, then you'll probably have to call them in to go ahead and take care of any kind of fail. But yeah, it can work really well. That's the one great thing with any of these products that we're talking about is they can all work, but you have to prove that they're working. And that's the perfect segue into testing here. So we have in-office testing and we have mail-in testing. One thing I really, really, really want to remind you though, is we are testing for colony forming units per the EPA and the CDC. That's less than 500 colony forming units. There are some tests out there on the market that I have seen that are testing for total dissolved solids or total coliform bacteria. And we really want to make sure that we are testing for the right thing. So make sure that whatever test you choose, that is indeed for dental unit water. So when should you test? Well, you want to probably test when you're just starting this journey, right? Here you go. Like, oh, it's time to test. Okay. Or it's time, we're at the beginning of this. What are we going to do? So you also want to test before you make any changes, just so you kind of know where you're at biofilm wise. And then come up with a system of check your manufacturer's instructions for use for your chair. That might say monthly, or it might go with the Association for Dental Safety recommendation, which is monthly until you pass for 2 consecutive months and then quarterly. So once you pass for 2 consecutive months, you can move to a quarterly testing system. And then after you fail, so if you have a fail, you need to shock, and then you're going to test again. I don't like, though, testing right after I fail, like right after I shocked, because often I will get a false pass. I want to wait a couple of days and make sure that biofilm's not going to bounce back. Jasmine Hardy says, what about Steri-Straw? So Jasmine, we are going to talk, when I get to straws, I will talk about that. And I'll even mention it when we're talking about shocking. So, so we'll get to that. So when you go to test, you you can do a pooled sampling. You can do a pooled sample, a combined sample, or you can test individual lines. So back in the day, when I first started my waterline journey, we had to test every single line individually. Now they have studies are showing us that pooled sampling is really fine. Kathy says, how long do you wait to test after shocking? 2 weeks. I missed it. Kathy, unfortunately, there is no study about this. So somebody should do a study. I would love that. But I recommend, I would say wait at least 2 days, but I have no studies around that. And Lorraine said, what about a piezo? We need to test the piezo, Lorraine, just like we would test an ultrasonic, just like we test our air water syringes. Definitely. They will fail just as often too. They have that nice low flow and that nice long line. So you definitely want to test those as well. Okay, so pooled sampling. Nice thing about pooled sampling is that you can just use one test per water source, which is great. And so per operatory, so you go into your operatory, and if you have an air water syringe, you have a power scaler, you have a handpiece line, and maybe you have an air polisher, you're going to take maybe 4 samples. And if they fail, you're going to shock all the lines anyway. If they pass, then you pass. So you're good. This is a great way to save money when it comes to testing. So here are some pro tips for getting a good sample. So first, figure out how many lines you're testing. What are you testing in your operatory? Air water syringe, handpiece, power scaler, air polisher, who knows? And then figure out how many that is. And so decide whether you're doing pooled sampling or individual sampling. And if you're doing pooled sampling, you're going to just take equal amounts of each one. So say you're doing 4, take a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter. So you want to remove any of the devices. You don't want to test your water through a handpiece or air water syringe tip. And then flush all your lines for 30 seconds, just like you would normally do in between patients. And then this is a pro tip, guys. Remember this one. If you are testing water from an air-driven handpiece, get that sample first, because I have done this wrong enough times where I've tested from the handpiece first or last, and you shoot out your entire sample because the air shoots the water out of the sample. So get that air-driven handpiece first. So in-office testing. I love in-office testing because it is 100% confidential and nobody sees you fail. Like the first time we tested water, we failed miserably because we weren't doing anything. And so I like failing in private. But you do get that imprecise number where I said those 2 dots. I was like, maybe that's 100. We don't really know, right? So it's an imprecise number, but it's more economical and you get your results in 1 to 7 days. And so mail-in testing is really nice because you get that third-party verification and you get more precise results, but it does require overnight shipping, so it's a little more expensive. But you get a report emailed to you, and you get those results in 1 to 7 days, depending on which mail-in lab you choose. So what do you do if you fail? I highly recommend the triple shock. That is shock 3 cycles in a row. So is that 3 10-minute bleach cycles in a row, or is that 3 overnights with liquid ultra in a row? But that really does a great job for getting off that protective layer of biofilm, that next layer, the virulent layer of biofilm, and that dead layer of biofilm. Try another shock product. Maybe you're using one that's a little more gentle. There's some that are stronger than others. Your strongest ones are going to be bleach and liquid ultra. Those are your big daddies. Check for a dead legs. A dead leg is a line that you don't use. Maybe you're in a hygiene room that could be a doctor's room, so it has a handpiece line that never gets touched. Well, that thing's been having a biofilm party, right? The biofilm's just been growing there. So make sure if it's a line you're never going to use, have a tech come in and cap it off. Test your source water. Perhaps you're using an in-office distiller that's failing, or maybe your tap water is failing. Who knows? In that second Georgia case I mentioned, they actually had a crack in the pipe outside of the office, and that's what was letting in the biofilm, and they were using tap water, and they were treating their water, but it wasn't strong enough to kill that much bacteria. And then lastly, check your filters. When I started with my waterline journey, my Cavitron had a filter that looked like this. It was black. And that was where the biofilm source was. And so you have to change some of those filters sometimes. Okay, so we've talked about shocking, we've talked about testing, and now we want to treat. We want to treat our water. And the reason that we want to do both shocking and treating is like this. So this is a picture of my dad. He is at his periodontal maintenance visit, right? So my dad's in here, and I am using my subgingival air polisher, and I am, getting in there with my power scaler, and I'm using my hand instruments, and I am like, my dad's going to be as clean as my dad can be, right? When he leaves my chair. But I would never say to my dad, hey, Dad, I'm such a good hygienist. You don't have to brush or floss or use your water flosser or anything. You don't have to do anything and between now and the next time you see me. No, I have my dad do home care, right? I have my dad do specific home care. I have him use picks and all that good stuff. And so that's like treating every day. That's your everyday care. And that kind of keeps that biofilm at bay. So if you choose to use a tablet, there's lots of different products on the market. Tablets are one where you can just drop a little tablet in the bottle. So figure out the size of your bottle and then put it in and fill it up with water and let it effervesce and then screw it on. Easy peasy. Lots of great products on the market and they work great. Straws and cartridges. So here you go, Jasmine. You asked about a Steri straw. So here you go. So straws and cartridges are great. The one big thing to remember is lots of well-meaning service techs told people, hey, if you put on the straw, you don't have to do anything for a year to your water. That is not true. You still need to test your water regularly, quarterly, please. Products are great, but products fail. A straw is good. Most of the straws are good for a year or 240 liters. Well, How do we even know what 240 liters is? I haven't a clue. So make sure you're still testing even if you're using a straw. So here are a few straws in the market, and there's that Steri straw that you mentioned there, Jasmine. So they can all work really well. One thing I will tell you though is often straws were failing around the 8 to 9 month mark, depending on the quality of the water you were using. And so ProEdge, who's a dental water lab company, they actually came out with a 6-month straw. So this one is not a year-long straw, it's a 6-month straw. And the idea is to give you that full force of antimicrobial back. It kind of had its own hygiene recall, right? So all of these are very effective treatments, but they all fail, right? So that's why we're testing. So liquids vary greatly in their instructions for use. So if you are using a liquid, ensure that you are following those instructions for use, whatever they say. And some could be daily dilution, some could be weekly treatments. Ooh, yeah, Yaslin said, when you clarified the pooling of samples, how would you know which unit failed? So Yaslin, if you do a pooled sample and you fail, typically you're going to shock all the lines anyway. However, I got to tell you, if I have a chair that keeps failing, that's when I'll start to do individual lines because I want to know where the problem is. So that's when I'll go to individual line testing. But often if you fail and you do a triple shock, you'll be passing again. And so it doesn't necessarily matter which line was failing. That's up to you. So here's some different liquids on the market. There's lots of them out there. So now we maintain. So we talked about shocking, we talked about testing, we talked about treating, and now we're going to maintain. The first thing you should do is appoint a waterline warrior. I have a cape, so I'm a big fan of that. And establish your standard operating procedures. What are you going to do? And then keep records of what you're doing, because we know, like in dentistry, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. So make sure that you are keeping track of your waterline journey. Now, here you go. I got this question from Nick Naj. So we talked about flushing our lines. So you want to flush your lines first thing in the morning. You will read studies that say 2 minutes. You'll read studies that say 8 minutes. It's been sort of decided that 20 to 30 seconds first thing in the morning is acceptable. And then 20 to 30 seconds in between every single patient. There is suck back that happens. You don't necessarily have to purge your lines at the end of the day if you're using an antimicrobial, because that can kind of kill the biofilm while you're at home. But make sure you follow your instructions for use, because they all kind of have different rules. So do what works best for you and your practice. Let's see. Should we be letting our water bottles sit empty, dry throughout the weekend? So Kaylee, this is a huge question, and that I don't have an answer to. We leave ours on. We use Blue Tab, so we have a tablet, and I like the idea of treated water sitting in my lines overnight over the weekend. So we do not do that. So there are some conflicting things out there, so we need a good study. Somebody, iPhone 5, said straight bleach or diluted. Definitely diluted bleach. And if you email me at the end, I can give you the instructions on how to dilute that. But I believe it's a 1 to 9, depending on the strength of your bleach. So it's going to depend. So go ahead and email me. Okay, there we go. I think I gotcha. So make sure you follow your IFUs. Okay, one big important thing about sterile water. If you are doing any kind of surgery, you need to be using sterile water with sterile tubing. Again, that doesn't mean sterile water put into your dental unit water bottle. That means sterile water through sterile or autoclaved or disposable tubing. And so that's things like implants, that's things like perio surgeries, anything that would open the bone, because that's expose the bone, because that's when those infections really, really happen. So that's our concern. So what are a couple myths I hear? I always hear we use distilled water, so we don't have to worry about any of this. Yes, you still have to worry about this. Distilled water still can grow biofilm, so it doesn't save you. And then people say, well, the city water comes straight into our units, so we can't do anything. We don't have to worry about this. I would say that you need to have your office retrofitted. So whether that's retrofitted with chairs or whether that's installing a centralized system, one or the other, you have to do that. Okay. Oh, how do we shock? Oh, perfect, Kendra. It was perfect timing for your question. I must have, she said, how do we shock a unit running on city water? You can't, Kendra. That's a problem. And so you need to come up with a plan that either you retrofit your chairs with bottles or you get a centralized system. So Kendra, if you're like, oh my gosh, what do? I would recommend testing your water and seeing where it's at, figure out what's going on, and then you and your office can come up with a plan. So little review on water. What do I have to do? You got to shock, test, treat. We got to test and document it, choose a maintenance product and use it per the instructions, flush those lines at the beginning of the day and in between patients for 20 to 30 seconds, retest quarterly at minimum, and make sure you document it, and then shock as needed. So again, I said we do it quarterly in my practice. So that's water. So we're going to move from water now into suction. So Suction, we know, really saves our day, right? I mean, you don't have suction, you're not gonna get the day done because, you're just drowning in spit, right? But what we really want for our suction is we want it to go ahead and stay kind of right in this zone 1. Do you see this nice little circle here right around the patient's mouth? Because we want those aerosols, be it coming from our patient's saliva or being coming from our water lines or the ambient air. We'd like to kind of keep all of that right at that patient's mouth, right? Not in zone 2 where it's affecting, the clinician or out there at the dental assistant. So how is your suction doing? And does your suction suck, right? And it's not just all about the thumb rate. Often do you ever just put your thumb on top of your HVE and you're like, yep, it's sucking. Well, we want our suction to do more than just suck up our finger. It also needs to be able to control aerosols. And so that's where flow rate comes in. And so flow rate is this concept of not only are we sucking up a liquid, but we also are grabbing that air. And so we want a flow rate of at least 7.1 standard cubic feet per minute. So it needs to be at least that. In Europe, the standard is 10.6. I'm not quite sure why we have a lower one. Okay, Jewel says, we have Steri-Straws. Do we still need to shock? I was told no at the office. So Steri-Straws, when you install them, they come with a shock, right? They come with an initial shock. You can shock a Steri-Straw quarterly with Citrasil without removing the straw. So Jewel, some of it is going to come down to kind of what you guys decide as an office is your protocol. No matter what, you have to test quarterly. And I would say if you're testing quarterly, Jewel, and you find one quarter, maybe quarter 3, you're starting to fail, then you go, okay, you know what? Our straw isn't holding up like we need it to. And so, yeah, we need to incorporate some shocking involved. And so whether that's taking off the straw and putting in a dummy straw, which I took out those slides because I'm trying to go fast, but and using a strong shock because you don't want to shock through your Steri-Straw unless you're shocking with Citrasil. Otherwise, if you're passing your waterline test, you don't need to shock. So just make sure you're testing no matter what. Okay, so flow rate. So I want to explain flow rate. So flow rate says, flow rate is, have you ever taken a can of evaporated milk and you make one hole and then the evaporated milk just kind of drips out? But then if you make another hole at the top, it really comes out fast, right? And so that's flow rate because it means that there's air coming in, pushing it out at the same time. And so that's what we want our suction to have. We want it to have both suction and flow rate. Let's see. Juju says, I've seen a dentist during the end of treatment spray in the suction. Oh, the remaining bleach used in a root canal. What do you think? I don't think that's a great idea because that could then affect your amalgam separator. So the bleach into the mercury that's hanging out in your amalgam separator could do bad things. So I would say I would not recommend that. I would say put it down your sink. Okay, so how do you know your flow rate? How do you learn? Well, you can call your friendly tech and ask them to check your flow rate. So this was back in 2020, and I called my friendly tech and asked them to come in and look at our flow rate. And this was Robbie, and this is what Robbie found. So remember I said 7.1, we wanted our suction, our flow rate to be 7.1. And so when we tested my flow rate, it was about at 7.8. And then we turned on Karen's suction and look at that, we went down to below 5. So it couldn't handle 2 hygienists using HVE. And so I said, oh my gosh, Robbie, do we need to buy a new vacuum? And Robbie's like, no, I've got some tips for you. So stay tuned. You're going to hear these tips of what Robbie had us do. But before we get into that, when we think about our suction, we think about keeping our patients comfortable, right? Because they're like, I'm drowning, I'm dying, I'm going to die on my own saliva, right? So we want to make sure that we keep our patients, keep our patients comfortable. But when we think about our suction, it's also important to think about our patient safety. And so you've seen your patients, they love to have that makeout session with Mr. Thirsty, right? I mean, it's terrible. But I got to tell you, running your lines is not enough to keep your suction safe. And so you want to make sure that you are really properly taking care of your suction to keep your patients safe and make sure that it's controlling those aerosols. So look at this picture. This is a crazy picture. So this is suction lines before cleaning, before running the suction. And then this is after the suction. And I got to tell you, it's still pretty gross, right? So then that's where the concept of backflow comes in, right? We've all heard of backflow. Backflow, according to the CDC, happens when previously suctioned fluids from the patient before go back into the next patient's mouth. It's like drinking out of a straw after a toddler. Have you ever watched their food go back into the cup? It's gross, right? So backflow can occur when the pressure in the patient's mouth as a result of closing it, sucking down on it, is too strong, and then it's able just to flow back in. And then suction, it can also occur if the ejector is positioned above the patient's mouth, so gravity cannot be our friend. And then lastly, if a saliva ejector and HVE are used at the same time. And so we want to make sure that we keep our patients safe from backflow. I mean, seriously, do you want that in your mouth? That is just from a regular saliva ejector. Like I just took it off and took a picture. It's so gross, right? So this is where backflow valves really come in handy. And so it's something that I want you guys to think about. And in fact, I just found out about a new one today that I haven't had a chance to add to this presentation, but disposable backflow preventers are really great for adding into your patient care, because then your patient can close their mouth because that's what they want to do, right? And frankly, it's convenient for us because it gets the water out of their mouth fast and out of our way. So think about using a disposable backflow preventer. And that way we're going to be able to kind of control those aerosols. So what do we have to do to take care of our suction? The biggest thing we got to do is we got to run this suction every day. Let's see. Juju says, thank you. Oh, what can be put between patient? They don't flush, and I have tried to say it's not okay. I don't know. I can, if you go to the instructions for your amalgam separator, it will tell you no bleach. And also, we're going to talk about it in just a second when we talk about a good product for suction. But you definitely don't want anything with a low pH into your vacuum because it could harm your vacuum. And vacuums are really expensive to replace, so you don't want that. Kendra says we use safe flow suction tips. Does this help with that? Yes, it does, Kendra. You have a safe backflow preventer. Good job. So I want you to make sure that you're running your suction every day. And there's great suction products on the market. Some of them, however, I want to tell you are not healthy, particularly for our amalgam separator. So make sure that the suction product that you choose has a pH between 6 and 8. And there are some out there that have a really low pH, and that's not good for your amalgam separator, and it's not good for your lines. So check your products, whatever you use, and make sure it's non-foaming and has no chlorine, so it's compliant with that EPA 2020 rule. And you want to make sure it's safe for patients and that it has chelating agents so that it can help kind of break things up. But one thing I really want you to do is I want you, when you are cleaning your suction lines, is I want you to use some kind of bucket system. And that what that does is, or not a bucket system, sorry, some atomizer. What that does is it pulls up water, it pulls up your suction cleaner, and it pulls up air at the same time. So it'll create a vortex in your lines and kind of scrub the inside of your lines really well. So there's lots of them on the market, but pick one and you can use pretty much any product in them. But it's a better way than that plunge and slurp method that we kind of probably learned in hygiene school where we're just plunging it into a bucket, which isn't great for your vacuum. So Lorraine says, are the disposable backflow stoppers single use only? So Lorraine, up until this morning, I would have said, yes, they're all single use only. I just saw one by Maxill, M-A-X-I-L-L, that is, you change the flapper valve between patients, but the rest of it is autoclavable, which is interesting. I don't have a picture of it. I just saw it for the first time this morning. So by Maxill. So there you go, if you're looking for one like that. Let's see. Allison says, does it make sense to test the iodine level within the water line of a SteriStraw bottle and replace as needed? What makes the most sense, Allison, is testing your lines. So test, I think, because then you're testing from your bottle, and I want to know what's happening in your lines. So I care a little less about the level of iodine in your straw, even though we know we need to be at least 1.5 part per million. But I really want to know what's happening on the other side, what's happening in your line. So I think that makes the most sense. So it's important for our suction to make sure that we're changing our traps. When I started this journey with Robbie, this is what my trap looked like. You want to talk about no airflow. I mean, think about your vacuum. Have you ever like changed the filters in your vacuum and they're totally stuck and that's why your vacuum's not sucking? This is it. This is it's our filters. You also have a big filter on your vacuum pump. And when I changed ours, look at that. Do you see that, guys? There was like no airflow happening there. It was like totally occluded with gunk. So it's important that you're making sure that you're running that suction every day, but then you're also changing those filters. So often people will reach out to me and ask me questions and they'll be like, Amanda, we have this really stinky suction problem. So this was a dentist and he reached out to me. And so he and I talked about lots of different things, but this is the plan he came up with. So I want to give him a shout out, big shout out to Alan for coming up with a plan to deal with his stinky suction. Like every day they would turn it on and it would be awful. And so what he decided to do was he, every day they are using Vac Attack Green. Okay. And they're mixing it in a dispenser and every day they're running their lines daily with Vac Attack Green. And then once a week, they're using vacuum clean in their, they put it in their trap and leaving that in, okay? And then quarterly, they've started this vacuum shock. So they're putting in the tablet of vacuum shock. They're running a gallon of warm water. They let it sit for 30 minutes, and then they change their traps. And he said since they started this, their suction is no longer stinky. So I've worked in a practice before that had stinky suction, and I got to tell you, that's terrible. So I love that he came up with this whole thing with these few products. So Jan says, can you say one more time what you recommend using instead of the plunge technique? I recommend using an atomizer. So it's a bottle that's specifically made for suction. And so I can show you a picture of one. I'm going backwards real quick. There we go. You can see a picture of one. This is one. And so you put your little lines on there and it brings in air at the same time as it brings in that suction cleaner. So there's lots of companies that make them. And just kind of pick one and kind of stick with it. But that's what will help you get that atomizer technique. Because you can see here, when you're using a bucket, it just stays at the bottom. But once you use the atomizer, it does a nice job of really cleaning the inside of those lines. So that's what I recommend. But any product in an atomizer is great. So if you listen to what Alan said, use that Vac-Attack green in there, and that'll do a great job. But just use that with an atomizer. So hopefully that was a great, oops, I hit the wrong button there. Answered that. So Alice, okay, no, and I answered that one already. Good. Okay. So how did we do? I told you, Robbie came in, he tested our airflow. We weren't doing a very good job. And so Robbie had some recommendations for me. So one of them was changing the traps, which you can tell our traps were gross, right? The next thing that Robbie talked about was changing our suction tubing. And if you think about your suction tubing, I think our suction tubing had been there for probably, I don't know, I want to say 30 years. Like it was probably the same suction. I don't even know. It was old, right? And so what I did was I went ahead and changed out all the HVE tubing, and I actually changed it out with this lighter tubing. Lots of companies are making it now. I gotta tell you, this stuff is the bomb. And in fact, I'd only changed out the hygiene rooms with this lighter HVE tubing. And I didn't change out the doctor rooms. And the dental assistant, my dental assistant was like, Stacy was like, why aren't you changing out my tubing? I want the lighter tubing too. It makes such a difference, especially if you're trying to figure out how to hold HVE while you're taking care of your patients. This will save you ergonomically. And it was super easy to do. I was able to change out the tubing all by myself. I just went and measured how much HVE tubing we had, and then I ordered that much tubing. And then I did the same thing with our slow speed tubing as well. And so, oh, I told Trung we didn't have a video, but I lied, but there's no sound, but you can see this. Okay, look, do you see how bendy this is? Look, that's the new tubing. And do you see this versus that old tubing? Look how hard the old tubing is to bend. So I want you to go think in your operatory, think about the tubing, and has it gotten all yucky and hard? All those wipes that we use, all of our disinfectant wipes, and over time, you think about how gross it is on the inside. And those things get hard, and that affects us ergonomically. And then you also just think, like, how gross is it too? Tanya says, does the attachments to run suctions on ADEX systems have an atomizer in them? And yes, Tanya, I do believe the suctions, yes, those little tubes that you can hook up on an ADEC, which is like genius, right? I believe that does atomize water. So I think you are safe there. Good. That's a great question. I like that one. And I like that they've done that. Oh, Lynn says we use a Biotrol atomizer. That's great, Lynn. Yeah, I do. I like those atomizers. It also makes cleaning the suction lines hands-free. So you can stick it on the atomizer and you can go and finish your chart notes, or you can finish turning your room over. So it's one freaking less thing to do, right? Because I need one less thing to do in my life. I don't know about you guys. Marlena said, how often should suction lines be replaced? So Marlena, there is no rule about how often to do this. But now that I did it once in my office, I will tell you, we've actually, one downside, I should mention, one downside to that lighter tubing is it doesn't last as long. So the old HVE tubing that we had lasted 30 some odd years, right? This lighter tubing I changed, it was late 2020, and it lasted about 3 years, and then it started cracking. So 3 years later, I had to replace the HVE tubing. But I will tell you, I replaced all of the tubing in my practice, and with that lighter tubing and the slow speed suction, and it was less than $200 to do it. And I just did it myself. So it wasn't an expensive thing to do. And man, that lighter tubing has just done such great things for everyone in the practice's ergonomics that nobody would go back to that heavy HVE tubing again. I think they would have a mutiny. So how did we do? So we did all of these things, right? So remember that initial reading was at a 7.6. So after 3 months of daily line cleaning, we got really good. We changed those traps. We started cleaning our lines every single day with an atomizer. We got to 8.7. And then I changed the tubing in our lines and we got up to 9.1. So not up, and if you remember, 7.1 is what the recommendation is for America. For Europe, it's 10.6. So we didn't get all the way to 10.6, but I got to tell you, we did all that without having to replace our vacuum. And my doctor was extremely happy about that because, that's an expensive, that was going to be an expensive process. So what do I have to do again? Let's talk about that. I want you to check the airflow on your unit. Find out what it is. Are you really controlling aerosols like you hope you are? So ideally we want between that 7.1 or that 10.6. Then set up some sort of daily SOP, making sure that you're cleaning your suction lines daily. Preferably you want to do it from the back of the office up to the front of the office. That way you're pushing it all through. It's like when you think about when you're sweeping your kitchen, like you're always going to start at the back away from the door and then go towards the door, right? And I would also say that you probably want to run suction after if you had a particularly bloody procedure. So if you're doing surgical extractions or things like that, go ahead and run your suction between patients. Change those vacuum traps once a week at your chair, and then that vacuum trap at the big vacuum trap once a month, or according to the instructions for use. If you find that it's just not getting that gunky that fast, but at least take a look at it. Check your suction valve adapter instructions for use and consider using a backflow preventer. And that way your patients can close their mouth comfortably and you don't have to think about what on earth they're getting in there. And making sure that we're using our HVE. We learned kind of with COVID that it's a good idea to use our HVE. And it's something that I never used until we got to COVID. So finding ways to incorporate that and do it ergonomically is great. So congratulations, everybody. You are now a line leader with me. And hopefully, everybody will just follow us and we can be line leaders too. So I'm going to run through these questions here. But here is if you have more questions that we don't get to today, here is my email address. Or if you want a copy of those bleach shock protocol, I'm happy to send you that too. Marlena asked if you get a copy of the slides. Marlena, no, but I can send you a PDF of kind of a breakdown of everything we talked about. If you email me, I'd be happy to send you that PDF. And then, Lil, thanks, Lil. Lil said I did a great job. Thank you, Lil. Thank you, Lil from Premier, for sponsoring this today. I appreciate Lil bringing this awesome information to you. And if you remember, guys, I mentioned the VAC Attack, that Alan loved VAC Attack, and that is something that's by Premier as well. So, all right, so let's see. Erica, if you message me about what to do for the waterline slide again, I will send it to you. And then let's see, Alice says, have you heard of offices testing water lines annually and looking at how loose those regulations are? Is it legal in some states? This is what I will tell you. I said the CDC is, I feel like the CDC is loosey-goosey. They just say the water you use in your operatory must be below 500 colony forming units. Well, how do you know what it is if you don't test? And so what we are seeing from the ADA, what we are seeing from the Association for Dental Safety is that at minimum, you should be testing quarterly. The CDC is in the middle of meeting, and I hope that they are coming up with a little more clarity on how often to test. But I think in a court of law, which I have actually seen some depositions in a court of law, quarterly is now the standard. So we should be testing quarterly. And so even if you feel like your state doesn't say so, that you're still going to be held to that quarterly because that is the standard. Let's see. Okay. And Juju, yes, go ahead and email me. Hi, Janet. She says this course never gets old. I think she's taken it like 85,000 times. Jan, if you want to see that backflow slide again, you can certainly email me. No, go ahead and email me at my email address, which is up right now. So Morgan says, in our office, we were told to start running lines from front to back. Yes. Would that be because our system is in the back? You want to run your lines from furthest away from the vacuum to closest to the vacuum. So that way it's kind of like cleaning all the lines and going across. Is putting mouthwash tablets in a bottle any use? I don't know what a mouthwash tablet is, but I would definitely, only tablets I would put in a bottle are ones that are antimicrobial for dental unit water lines. I wouldn't put anything in to flavor the water or anything that could mess up any of your lines or any of your fittings. If you want a PDF of the presentation, please send me an email. Oh, and Lil says, thank you for all who attended this evening and the team at Viva Learning. So yes, thank you guys for having me. Kaylee says, should we be keeping a photo proof of our pass or just documenting? Kaylee, I do both. I take a picture of every test we have and I document it we have a log. So I write pass, but then I also have pictures of all the slides just in case, because who knows? I don't know. I think it's a good idea, right? Rochelle says, how do you read the ProEdge water lines late to the webinar? Okay, I'm not sure how many red dots are technically passing. They in the instructions for use, when you get that ProEdge paddle, it will show you kind of a good rule of thumb. So it needs to be it needs to be a fair amount of dots, but they have a great example in the box. And if you have more questions, you can call ProEdge. They will totally answer that for you. Naj said, what water testing company do you recommend? I work with ProEdge on a regular basis, so I'm probably a little biased, but I really like them. Alice says, what type of vacuum trap needs to be changed at least once a month? Your big trap on your actual vacuum, it'll look like a big cup, and you want to change that because it can get really gross. Lee says, are you purchasing the tests from your suppliers or a company? You can do it either way. Your suppliers have access to tests, or you can go direct to many of the waterline test companies. And then Summer says, I wanted to note that if you contact Stericyl or ProEdge, they have a free waterline maintenance binder for offices that don't have a set protocol. You are correct, Summer. Good job. Yes. Many of these companies will help you get successful with your waterline journey. So, okay, Juju says, what does it mean running lines from the front to back? So I'm saying if, she says, what if there's no sync for running lines between patients? Oh, you mean, oh, I understand exactly what you're saying. We were talking about two different things, Juju. So when I was saying running lines from front to back, that was suction lines. Running your lines in between patients, if you don't have a sink, I would have a bucket. So keep a bucket under your sink and just run it for 30 seconds into a bucket. And then you can dump out that bucket on a regular basis. Kendra says, our compressors in the basement of a building. How would we start for testing? So Kendra, we are not testing our compressor because that's suction. We are testing our water. So you want to test the water that's getting flow that would go into your patient's mouth. So whether that's your air water syringe, water from your handpiece, water from your power scaler, that's where you're going to get that water for testing. The compressor is a whole different story. Yeah, I know they get confusing, don't they? Josie asked, how do we obtain our CE? You will get an email from Viva Learning. So they will, it's easy to do. Do you know when you have this webinar again? If you check my website, I think I have this webinar coming up again. So it's just amandahillrdh.com. But I don't remember the date off the top of my head. Jan says, did you say if you use the straw, you need to take the straw off to shock? So Jan, this is a tough one. And I took out these slides because I was trying to go too fast to do water and suction. But depending on the brand of straw you are using, you might need to take it off to shock, because you don't want to run shock product through a straw, or else you could damage it. So Stericyl and Citracyl are the only two products that can work together. But if you were using, say, a blue tube straw and you want to shock with Liquid Ultra, you need to take that off and put a dummy straw on, which is just an uptake straw. ProEdge can mail you one if you want one, if you don't have one. And if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to explain that in a little more detail. Let's see. Where did you say we could get the free protocol for offices? That person that said that, they said ProEdge has a protocol that's free. So if you go to proedge.com, or Stericyl has one. I also have one. So if you email me, I can send you my protocol too. Naj said that stinky suction powder, where can that be purchased? That is a product by Premier, and it's called VacAttack. So you can probably get that through your dealer, I would bet, and just ask for VacAttack. So it's great stuff. All right, I think we got through it all. Yay. Oh, wait, one last one. Can you flush your lines into the trash? Yes, you could flush your lines into the trash. Just make sure whoever's taking out the trash knows the trash might be wet. So we don't want them to make a mess. So I think that's it, everybody. I think we answered all of the questions. Thank you guys so much. And if you have more questions we didn't get to, feel free to email me.